Alright. What's up, you guys? It's me, Astro. Welcome back if it's not your first time. Welcome to the channel if it is. Today, the topic that was picked by Twitter was offense for the next Tekken Academy episode, and here we are. If you would like to be able to vote on the next topic you would like me to speak on and go over, please go ahead and follow me on Twitter. The link will be down in the description below. Today's going to be a little bit of a doozy. There is quite a bit that I want to talk to you guys about because I want to make sure I get all the basics and generals out of the way in case we have to get deeper on a later episode. So, with that being said, let's just get straight into it. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe if you guys do enjoy the content, and let's get straight into it. I'll catch y'all in a second.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Something you've never witnessed before.
So, if you guys recall in the movement video that we did last time, if you guys haven't watched it, we're going to be using concepts from the movement video, so go ahead and peep that one. We'll leave the link up top. Like we talked about, I said that the most important thing in the foundation of your game is going to be your movement, and that's where we're going to start with offense. We're going to talk about how to enclose space or catch people who might be trying to make space with our movement. And this can actually all be done without pressing a single button like I had talked about before, and that's why I think movement is so important, why I went over it at such length. So to start off, I have a video recording of Raven. The most important thing that you can know is no matter how fast your opponent's backdash is, you'll move forward faster than they move backward. You guys see we have a video recording. Raven's trying to get out of there, right? So let's try starting off with wave dash, right? Note how far I'm pushing him, right? Which means that I can create space faster than he can make it, or I can close space faster than he can make it, right? That's important to note. Okay, the same thing if your character doesn't have a wave dash. The same thing goes with dash blocking, right? If he's getting out, I can dash block, I will catch him every time, right? I can stay with him, I can keep up. Now, the reason why these two are important is because movement backwards almost always is tied with a plan. When you get up to higher levels, people are going to have an idea of what they want to do, which is create whiffs, right? So a lot of the time, like we said, the thing that you would do is you think, oh, my opponent's Korean backdashing, right? I can use a move to try and clip the Korean backdash, which is true, right? Let me see if I can do it right here. If you're trying to get out, boom, just like that. He's backdashing, he's holding back, but he still got hit by me, right? Now, the way this goes is that the opposite is, like we said, we're trying to create, they're trying to create space, we're trying to close gaps, and we're using our movement to do so. So how do we apply this, right? I already have a pre-recording of it, but what we're going to do is we're going to have Raven, and I'm going to show you guys what the recording looks like first. We're going to have Raven do a couple backdashes into a jab, which is a normal keep out move for a lot of characters that don't have really big, like obvious, like, oh yeah, this is a good counter hit button, this is good, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to try and see what happens if, right, if I go in and I'm too overzealous with it, right, with my moves, and I'm not paying attention to my opponent, right, I can get clipped, and then all of a sudden it's not my turn anymore, right? The space that I'm trying to close is now, it's now his turn, right? So it's important to make sure that you're careful with it, and that's why we want to implement dash blocking. In the event that he's trying to create space and I'm trying to close it, right, if I dash block at him, right, it gives me the ability to play defense and offense at the same time. And that's what you want. That's the best thing you want. You go for safety over all else in situations like this, right? And of course, once again, when you start to get better at it, you can start doing things to kind of do things like, if you notice your opponent likes to keep out with jab, right? Being able to close space. Hold on, let me see if I can get him to. Being able to close space and then do things like high crushes, right? To try and keep your opponent in check, to try and score counter hit launches and things of that nature, right? So using your movement is super important, both defensively and offensively, because you can use it to create openings that you wouldn't even know were possible, right? Just by being able to place your buttons properly, read your opponent and what they like to do, and that can be one way that you could score hits in the neutral, right? Being able to clip backdashes, having the ability to see that, okay, my opponent wants to keep out with a certain button, I can step that, or I can move and I can block it and punish it depending on how punishable it is, right? And being able to use that safety, that idea to kind of create space, and you did all that by pressing forward a couple of times, right? And I think that that's extremely powerful for new players to understand, because a lot of the time when you're playing against somebody especially in lower levels of play, the moves that they use are not going to be safe, right? People are going to be throwing out their big boy, like their big boy launchers, right? They're going to be throwing out all the this combo, if this clips, I'm going to get 1,000,000 damage, right? But a lot of the times those moves are not safe. So being able to look at those and being able to dash block and say, oh, hey, ooh, I caught that, it's -14, and punish accordingly is extremely good, and it will help you out on offense in the future. And the best part about it is it will also scare your opponent into stop pressing buttons, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the video. So from this point, we're going to start talking about a concept that has a really bad negative stigma within the community as across the FGC in general, and that's going to be the concept of flowcharting. So for those of you guys who don't know, flowcharting is basically doing A, B, C, D, E, F, G in a sequential order, regardless of what your opponent does, every time without thought. Essentially, it's the epitome of brain off offense. And I'm gonna tell you why that's bad, but I'm gonna also tell you why it can be kind of good. It depends on how you look at it. Now, in the sense of it being bad, brain off offense or flowcharting is terrible if you're not taking note of how your opponent responds to the flowchart, right? I want you guys to kind of think about Tekken as a conversation, right? You're gonna give your point, or you're gonna say something, your opponent's gonna say something back, you respond to that, they respond to you, it keeps going back and forth until somebody's health bar hits 0, right? So let's go ahead and set something up real quick. We're gonna set up a little offensive flowchart for Jin, right? And it is going to be 2-1, down 4-2, into electric. Pretty simple, right? Safe on block, plus on block. Now let's look and see something, because a lot of people have the problem of their flowchart isn't real, and that's the first problem that you would have, is if you're doing something that's unsafe or not real, then it's not a solid flowchart. So let's look. 2-1, down 4-2. I get stuffed by a jab. 2-1, down 4-2. So that doesn't work, okay? And we'll do this. I'll down 4-2 into electric. Also, there's a big enough gap to be jabbed out of. Now, if we're looking in the bad sense, we look at this and we say, oh, well, oh my gosh, this guy's just mashing. He's just mashing. He's just mashing. I can't do anything on offense. He's just mashing. Or we can think of it like this. Okay, in the good way, right? My opponent's trying to take his turn back with jabs, which are highs. How can I counter this? Well, maybe next time I do 2-1, I avoid it by ducking. You guys saw the little punish window light up. That means that my response to his response got him hit. And in a lot of cases, if you guys know this game, you do a lot of damage. So, right, you look at this and you use this to discourage your opponent from pressing buttons. He just lost half of his health for pressing jab. That's supposed to be something that's supposed to be safe, and when we talk about offensive game playing a little bit later in the video, we'll talk a lot about it. But taking your opponent and launching them for things that are normally supposed to be regular inside of a game is really demoralizing, and it can help you enforce your flowchart a little bit harder. So let's move to the next scenario. So let's say we get him to stop pressing on 2-1 into down 4-2, right? But he still wants to press here because this down 4-2 is -9. I can't do anything here, right? There's nothing I can do here, right? Except for one thing, because Jin CD1 crushes highs. So if I notice my opponent likes to take his turn here, maybe instead of doing any of the other options, I go here. And once again, right, your opponent gets launched for trying to take their turn back, right? So essentially, right, when you turn your brain off on offense, you need to heighten your brain's, you need to key in your brain for every other aspect, especially on your opponent's defensive tendencies, right? When you can run your offense without thinking about it, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because it allows you to let your muscle memory take over on offense and see what it is your opponent's doing on defense. That's how I do a lot of my offensive work, and that's how I get a lot of my hits, making sure that I'm constantly adapting to what my opponent's doing and being able to respond accordingly. Now, in that exact same sense, it's worth noting that good players are going to be doing this back at you. So if I'm playing in a game and I see this and I do this and I take his life, I take his life for jabbing at me, right? A lot of people aren't going to like that. So they're going to try and think, okay, well, if he's going to do, CD1, then I'm just going to block. And then, I'm just going to block. And if he starts blocking and I keep continuing my pressure here, right? Eventually, he's going to think, okay, he's going back to his electric. So let's try doing this. He ducks, now, right? Instead, if his response is ducking, so my high misses. If you guys don't know, most characters do have a wall rising launcher. I don't know, I can't record it clean unless I'm Raven and I don't want to go back to character select, but if Jin does this, Raven while standing 1 sends me to the moon, right? So essentially, right, the response would be if I keep flowcharting poorly and I keep doing this, Raven's gonna duck and punish me, right? That's kind of the idea. You keep, you know what I'm saying, you go back and forth and keep finding ways. But if I notice that my opponent's doing this and he's ducking to avoid my electric, there's other ways to do it. So maybe I duck in and I do wall standing 4-4, right? And I punish him for ducking to try and stop my offense, right? So that's kind of the idea. It's adaptation to what your opponent does and their reaction to allow you to be able to score more hits, right? So we talked earlier about scoring hits in neutral. This is going to be about using your flowchart for good, not bad, right? Making sure that we're constantly adapting and evolving our flowcharts so that we can further advance ourselves offensively as players. And the further you get into the game and the more your brain kind of gets used to playing at a higher Tekken speed, is what I've heard people say about it, basically being able to play faster, your brain processes things a little bit better, right? And you get a keener eye for things that your opponent's doing, you can start breaking your flowchart entirely and you can start freestyling. And that's when the game really starts to get fun, because you start being able to do things in a manner as to which you like to do it, and you know how to scare your opponent and stop pressing buttons. You know how to scare your opponent into making sure that they wait to make sure it's their turn first, right? That's what you want to try and do. You want to be able to find different ways to use your flowchart to enforce your character's game plan so that you can win the game, essentially. Good? Good. So, from the prior example, I know that you guys are probably thinking, okay, response to the response, this to that, that to this. So the concept then comes in of this. I know you guys saw me using a lot of launchers, right? While standing 2, CD1, oh my lord, I can't electric, CD1, and, you know, other moves. I'm sure you guys have your own big moves that come to mind, right? Now, I like to call those big moves, right? It's because they do a lot, right? They either launch your opponent, give you some type of plus frame advantage, or give you the ability to do something, right? So what I want you guys to keep in mind too is that you don't need to use big moves all the time, because a lot of the time, if you guys notice this, a lot of the time big moves, minus 12, minus 13, minus 19, minus 13, they're all punishable. So this is a simple concept that I want you guys to keep in mind. You don't want to become a big move Brian, okay? And I don't mean like Brian Fury, I just mean like that's the only name that I thought of on the spot that started with a B. So you want to avoid just constantly using big moves unless they serve, because every big move has a counter to it, right? Whether it be that the move is minus on block, or whether it be that something like, oh, it's a high, or it's a punishable low, or things like that, right? You want to stop yourself from having to key in and only using, I gotta use giant moves because they give me big damage, and be okay with being able to do things like, you know, taking a wall standing 4, right? Staying safe on block, doing things that keep you safe and allow you to not die for, you know, or put yourself in a bad spot for getting blocked, right? This is also important when we're talking about keep out moves, but we'll go over that a little bit more in the defensive section, because we have more to talk about for offense. But basically, I wanted this section to be about not being a big move Billy, big move Brian, big move Bartholomew, big move Bridget for the ladies out there. We want to avoid all of that, right? So basically, your huge moves have their place, right? Whether it be to, like we had talked about before, whether it be to punish people for trying to take their turn back too fast, right? Whether it be to punish people for trying to take their turn back too fast, or maybe keep out, right? But you want to make sure that you keep it in your brain that we also want to maintain safety in these situations. We want to maintain conditioning in these situations, and we want to make sure that we leave our opponent as few opportunities as possible to harm us while we perform our offense. So, we had talked a little bit about it in the section about flowcharting, about how to, like, you know, when you see opponents trying to take their turn back and things like that. But what I want to talk about is gearing that, taking their turn back up a little bit higher. we want to talk about how to defeat aggressive opponents, and more often than not, that includes people who are straight, flat out mashers, right? Defeating mashing is a little bit, it's character specific for sure, but I'm going to give you an example, and I want to hope that you guys can kind of apply that. So one thing that we saw is that if we have opponents who try to take back their turn aggressively, doing things like doing safe minus things into ducking to be able to launch them for wanting to do that, or doing our setups that involve high crushes, right? But sometimes your opponent isn't always going to do highs, and in the event that they don't, right, let's say that Raven's going for down forward ones instead, this won't work. So how do we prevent our opponent from getting overzealous and doing that? Well, we talked about this a little bit in the movement video, where we can use our opponent's response to create our own offense. If we notice that our opponent is aggressively pressing buttons or mashing, a lot of the time the best thing that you can do is try to set them up for a counter hit, right? So an example of that would be hitting a low straight to this, right? Now now that counter hit usually, if I can get it, if I can find something, hold on, right? It'll net you some type of reward, right? If you can force your opponent into doing something, right? Now, if you notice your opponent is constantly pushing buttons, like I said, every character has different counter hits. You want to try and go for the one that you want to make sure it's the tightest they can be. So if your opponent's mashing jab after, like, say, an electric that's +5, doing Jin standing 4 will counter hit them and allow you to get a follow-up, right? But if you notice your opponent's a masher, sometimes you can go for the big one. So another Jin setup that you have is if you do down back 4 into 4 and you guys trade, Jin's +27, so you can, right? You use your opponent's aggression to your advantage. You can either complain about the mashing and be defeated by it, or you can go in the lab and find out ways to defeat the mash, right? Try and find your good counter hit tools. Try and see if there's situations where you can force it so that it's like, okay, if you press a button here, you're gonna die, right? Try and see if there's ways that you can make it so that when your opponent whiffs or your opponent does something, right, you can set it up so if he tries to take his turn back wrong, he gets launched, right? And this kind of goes into having our setups and adaptation. You're going to hear that a lot with offense because it's super, super important. Adaptation and always evolving yourself to your opponent is super important. You're never going to be able to play two people in this game the same, I promise you. There's always going to be slight differences in how they like to take their turn. Some people like to dick jab instead of stand jab. Some people like to press their big button back at you, right? Like if in certain situations, right, so characters are going to try and hop kick out of situations if they get slows, right? So understanding, okay, if I do this and I block and he tries to hop kick, I can punish that, right? Use your offensive aggression to read their defensive aggression and being able to find counters for it, right? Make sure that you have your setups, make sure that you have your counter hit buttons that you know can work, and also too, worth noting, right, knowing when you can sidestep out of things, right, to make things miss. Hold on, which way is it? Right? Yeah, there we go. So like being able to use this to be able to create offense. We talked about this in the movement section, but being able to set this up so that you can make space for yourself, be able to create offense and do things, right, to make sure that your opponent doesn't mash on you is super important. And to be honest, there's some people, and we're just going to be real, there's some people who will not be conditioned, and that's okay, because those people, if you do your research and you make sure that you learn how to defeat the mashers properly, you shouldn't lose. I say shouldn't because sometimes you just get got, and that's okay, right? It's a part of the game. You find out how you got, you go in and you learn how to not get got, because like Marshawn Lynch said, you gonna get me and I'm gonna get you, but I'm gonna get you more than I get got. Easy? Easy. This section's really small because it kind of ties into the first section where we talked about flowcharts and reading opponents' defense or defensive tendencies, right? But I wanted to put a bigger emphasis on the counter hits because a lot of characters, I'm pretty sure every character has at least some form of counter hit launcher, right? So if you catch somebody mashing, make sure that you know those so that you can apply them correctly so that you can defeat your opponent and try to dissuade them from pressing buttons on you during your offense so that you can properly run. So The next thing that we're going to talk about real quick is our setups, how we can use them, and why overuse of them and gimmicking people with knowledge checks all the time isn't good. Okay, so I think that since Tekken's moving to more of a 1-to-2 format, right, with the way that ranked is set up now, knowledge checking people is becoming more and more of a thing, and basing your play around the knowledge checks is extremely popular as something that I've found out from playing online. And although throwing out a knowledge check here and there isn't crazy, and it's not, you don't want to build your entire game plan on them, because if somebody figures out how to deal with the knowledge checks, you will find yourself in a much worse scenario. It's kind of the same to flowcharting, right? If you're constantly doing your knowledge checks and throwing them out because, I got the one guy before, I'll get this guy too, you're going to notice diminishing results the further and higher you get. So one of the most classic ones that I actually like is Raven's. Raven has a low that is actually safe on block. So, oh, I have to actually record it. I was wondering what was going on right there. So we're gonna have Raven do CD3. Okay, and you guys are gonna see from my frame advantage actually that this is very unlike other lows, because it's only -9. So Raven's actually safe here, kind of, because if you guys notice, Raven's back turned, right? When you're back turned, you can't block. So even though Raven has his back to me, I can still hit him. This is where one of a knowledge check that a Raven player might throw out on you comes into play, right? Because if Raven does CD1 or crouch S3 into parry, right? If I try to punish him for this, oops, hold on. Boom, I get parried, right? So by making the correct read, I get punished. And so what we can do is we can see that, and you can see that as somebody who has a gimmick or some kind of some kind of knowledge check and be like, oh, this is a really good one. And it is, it's really good. It helps so that Raven can kind of mind game people into, okay, is he gonna parry, is he not, what is he gonna do, right? But also remember that if you keep doing it, eventually your opponent's gonna wise up, and usually it might only take once, and they might not go about things the way you think, because if you guys didn't know, parries are unbreakable when thrown. So if I set Raven to do it into the parry, if you guys heard that noise, that means that throw was unbreakable. So there's counters to your counters, as we saw, right? With Jin CD1, you can just block it, and if he CD1s, he's punishable. With Raven, if you notice that they like to parry after the safe low that puts them in back turn, or when they go back turn, they like to parry a lot, you can throw, right? So what I want you guys to understand is that your gimmicks and your setups aren't horrible. A lot of the times they're really good, and they have an idea that they want to enforce, right? Like, so for Jin, it's, hey, don't jab me, right? Use something else, and then I can beat you with one of my faster moves when you use your slower mid, right? Or like with Raven, it's like, hey, don't punish me while my back's turned, because I can counter and you'll take damage for trying to do the right thing, which allows him to steal turns. But what you guys don't want to do is you don't want to formulate your entire offensive game plan based off of a gimmick, because what that does is that when you get into situations where you have to play solid, you will be unable to, because all that's in your mind is, knowledge check this, knowledge check here, I can knowledge check here, right? And that will lead you to a plateau faster than anything, right? You want to have a solid offensive game plan, watch high level play of your characters and see what they do, and then you can sprinkle in the knowledge checks and the setups here and there, right? That's what you guys want to make sure that you're doing. I want to make sure that I'm not leading people to start throwing out, oh, we must knowledge check everyone we see in ranked. Don't do that. Don't do that. Make sure that you can, knowledge checks are best used when they are paired with solid offensive play, because it's something that isn't expected, right? If a Raven is playing really good and he's like, he's placing his jabs well, he's using his down forward one properly, and he's good, he's using good pokes, and he makes a bad decision, you block a low and he parries you once, and then maybe next time he just does the low, you block it again, and he just backs off, and now you just let him go for free, right? Or with Jin, right? Maybe they jab you, you launch him, you hit him with a combo, and then the next time you just don't use your frames, or you stay safe, because they're not going to try to punish you for it, because you have shown them a setup that you can do, right? Showing them the knowledge check 1 time or 2 times, right? Unless, of course, like I said, they don't adapt, right? If they don't adapt, keep cooking them. But if they do start adapting, right, being able to use their adaptation to your advantage and being able to see, okay, he's letting me go now. So now maybe instead of Raven doing the low, it gets blocked or whatever the case may be. And instead of taking his frames or retreating, maybe he just turns back around and hits you, right? Maybe he starts applying more pressure because you let him off scot-free, right? I want you guys to start thinking when you have your setups and things like that, start thinking in that manner. How can I use this to further enforce a game plan of solid play? And with that, I think that's basically it for offense. I feel like I've covered a pretty large portion of it, and I want to thank you guys once again for watching. Once again, I hope this helps you guys, and like I said before, if you guys have any questions or you guys have anything that you want to add, maybe drop it in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter or Twitch while I'm streaming. Everything will be down below in the description, and I'll catch you guys later. I'm also sorry, guys, my computer's breaking down. It's like erupting. That's been that squeaking noise in the back if you've made it this far. But we'll be back later, and then like I said, polls will be on Twitter so we can have them up to see what comes next. I hope to see you guys there. We'll catch you guys next time. Have a good one.
The truth shall set you free.